Hello everyone. Today we will have a sitting with a small lecture on the writer as traveler, the border crossings, the travels, and the writings of D.H. Lawrence. Part 2. In Part 1, towards the end, there was some kind of an acoustic glitch, and my own voice, two voices, were overlapping each other. So there was a problem, slight problem in audibility. So I have to basically state first what was there in the last 39 seconds. Basically, I was talking about the conversion of the protagonist in The Plumed Serpent from European to someone completely absorbed by Mexican religion, place, zeitgeist, and some timeless essences of Mexican culture. And we were also talking about how it indicates the conversion or transmogrification of the author from an Anglo-Saxon author to someone whose Anglo-Saxonness is completely engulfed by, torn into pieces by an encounter with hitherto unknown other called Mexican culture. We started the lecture by saying that there was a decisive shift in Lawrence's travel career as a traveler, also as an author, and the former half of that traveler figure was someone who was basically looking for reasons and excuses to go to different places. But the second half is where different places, by their difference, were beckoning him to come out of the crisis in European civilization that D.H. Lawrence was personally feeling. Also, the entire modernist generation of artists and authors were feeling. In this lecture today, we will see the coloniality and post-coloniality, the politics, and some innate psychological nuances of Lawrence as a traveler, his travel writings, his encounter with otherness, other places, other countries, other customs. Western travel books have long been used to confirm the cultural and racial superiority or supremacy of the West, the imperial West, in form and content, rhetoric and narrative conventions. The Western travel narratives became almost an indispensable part or metonym for the entire colonial enterprise or discourse. Take Conrad's Lord Jim, for example. Beneath and beyond everything else, it is a drama of colonial heroism, of the white man in strange non-white territories. Now, D.H. Lawrence, being an author who is hailing from the West, and not only traveling outside West, but also inside different Western countries that stood for some kind of contrariety or contradiction or opposition to the British cultural model, national model, for example, the Mediterranean belt, would definitely bring with him what cannot be erased by the ego or consciousness of the author, the innate points of views and the innate perspectives and the innate judgmental frames in which one was born and brought up. In spite of being a European travel writer, I find that Lawrence resists the colonial formula of travel writing and travel fiction by certain number of uniquely Lawrencean tendencies. First of all, if you look carefully, then almost in all the writings, he resists the notion of spirit of British nationality or spirit of the British Empire by some different spirit called spirit of the place. And while the writer is a traveler, which means his place is no longer fixed, the enigma of arrival invokes, almost like an ode, the spirit of the new place to blow through him and make him the lyre or musical instrument or the sound or the discourse of that place, of that spirit of the place. And by spirit of the place, Lawrence implied something different from the usual picturesque or exotic landscapes and cultures which were often depicted in the travel narratives. He had rather a concern for capturing the local essence, the indigenous rhythm of the place, which does not depend on whose perspective it is being seen from, as long as it is seen, because it makes itself inevitable and organic to the place. So someone who is a new arrivant, someone who is an outsider, even if his point of view is not trained to see the totality or completeness of the spirit of the place is so heavy around him as soon as he arrives that he has to take it in to a large extent, and he has to see it even if his eyes are not trained. So spirit of the place is something which is an independent variable, relatively autonomous of bias by the point of view. This is something unique that Lawrence was using as a tool, as a concept, as a practice, as a travel writer. Secondly, Lawrence was a psychological expert. Being a psychological explorer of the human mind, especially the unconscious, and not only a geographical explorer of places, Lawrence sensed and tried to depict the relationship between people and the paradox of such a relationship. And Lawrence puts the place as some kind of a magnet that pulls the strings of that paradox. The place with its features and characteristics seem to explain the paradox, as the place and the individual unconscious of the protagonist, let's say, seem to absorb each other. In almost all the narratives, we find this cusp. It's like the unconscious of the character is trying to absorb the place into itself, and the energy of the place, or the inertia of the place, whichever, the spirit of the place is trying to absorb the individual unconscious into it. So it's like a mutual engulfment that Lawrence uses when he is describing about places and people. Let us see now a few examples of Lawrence as a travel writer, Lawrence as a traveler, a researcher of the spirit of the place. For example, in Twilight in Italy and Sea and Sardinia, in these two writings, Lawrence reveals his own fear of American imperialism, American expansionism, including industrial expansionism, not only military expansionism. And Lawrence keeps searching for an organic connectivity between the local people and their place, their environment in Italy and in Sardinia. Then in Mornings in Mexico, quite a difficult book, it apparently seems to be filled with some kind of a horror, some kind of a heart of darkness. The place would not leave you. It will pull you down into some kind of almost self-destructive existentialist change. And throughout this writing, we find that Mexico, now in this book, Mornings in Mexico, we find that there is some kind of uncanny spirit in the Mexican or Mexican sky, in the Mexican or Mexican soil, in the Mexican or Mexican fields and rituals. And this uncanny spirit is heavy enough to make the Anglo-Saxon or the Mediterranean author's self-confidence or previous sense of belongings go into pieces. It is at once a fearful threat of auto-destruction in a new land, some kind of heart of darkness of Conrad, and a remarkable transmogrification through the fire sermon. For example, something like a Byzantium to which W.B. Yeats was sailing to. And the third example is definitely the plumed serpent, about which we have talked in the part 1. Here we need to see some kind of a dichotomy, or let's say some kind of a contrary, like Blake's Lamb and Tiger. On one hand, in the cities of Mexico, for example, Mexico City, the capital, Kate, the European traveler and the protagonist, and in spite of gender and nationality differences from Lawrence, let's say the spokesperson or the doppelganger of Lawrence, the author himself, she finds that the entire milieu and the atmosphere and the place, the entire city, the entire space was heavy with cruel, malign spirit. Why cruel? Because it will not let the outsider remain the outsider. It would change him or her. So there is a cruelty of conversion at the moment of entry that the place offers, almost like a hostile entity waiting for the outsider, and summarily, violently, very, very fast, making the outsider an insider, a hypnotized insider. And on the other hand, we have the same Kate who encounters a crippled boatman who was rowing Kate across the lake, and some native naked men of pagan belief in the middle of the lake. And although there is no significant conversation or there was no significant encounter relation between the two sides, Kate feels strange and mysterious forces of a gentle, frail, pure sympathy between human beings as strangers. And in that almost epiphanic boat journey across the lake, Kate understands the power of the place. So if you look into these examples, then we would see that Lawrence was definitely significantly different from the Western travel writers whose adventures, explorations, diaries, and fantasies fueled the Western imagination's auto-congratulatory need of heroism amid alien corn. But Conrad was looking for genuine conversions, spiritualities, changes, mantras outside his country and then outside his continent.